So how do you know you've made a good engine? You know you made a good engine when Lotus, those crazy guys from the UK that build street illegal track weapons, come and say, "Give me it." What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Iconic Engines. Today we are covering Toyota's 2ZZGE engine. And if your attention span manages to take you to the end of this video, you will be rewarded with some 2ZZGE rap. I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm doing it anyway. The 2ZZGE engine began life in 1999, building on the base created by the 1ZZ-FE engine just 2 years earlier. So what was 1999 like for Toyota in general? Well, it was a bit of a sad time for Toyota's performance car segment. For example, the MR2 turned from looking like a Ferrari knockoff to looking like a Porsche knockoff. Seriously though, the MR2 turned from this turbo-powered 245 horsepower craziness into a really good handling but much tamer 140 horsepower naturally aspirated car. Toyota's great Supra was also nearing the end of its production run. The Higashi Fuji plant already started churning out the last units, and by 2002 the Supra would be finished as well. So as you can see, it was a bit of a sad time for car enthusiasts. So the end of the millennium signified a change within Toyota. Sports and performance cars were sinking ever lower on the list of priorities, while fuel-efficient and emissions-friendly cars were getting higher and higher on the list of priorities. It was sort of like Toyota's wife told it, you know, honey, times are hard, we're kind of short on money, so please stop playing with sports cars and go make something fuel efficient that's gonna sell really well. So Toyota decided to make something that's modern and fuel efficient, but also really sporty. Now the ZZ series of engines was designed to replace Toyota's really popular A series of engines that spawned the legendary 4AGE. And here's something interesting. If you look at all of Toyota's previous performance-oriented four-cylinders, the performance variants from the A series and the S series and the T series and the R series, you're gonna notice they all have one thing in common, and that's that they all have a cast iron block. Toyota always preferred beefy, reliable engineering solutions that are very unlikely to fail. Cast iron blocks are one such thing. And it probably explains why Toyota was so slow to abandon cast iron blocks in its four cylinders compared to many other manufacturers. Cast iron blocks are great, but they're also kinda heavy and kinda outdated. And times were changing. Toyota had to build something more modern. So the ZZ series of engines got an all-aluminum block. Now you might be mistaken to think that the ZZ is Toyota's first ever all-aluminum engine. It's not. It's Toyota's first ever four-cylinder all-aluminum engine. But Toyota's first all-aluminum engine was also Japan's first ever all-aluminum engine, and it was Toyota's V series of engines. So Toyota went to work on the 2ZZ engine. It used all of its saved up experience points on its famous summon Yamaha to design your cylinder head special skill, and thus Yamaha was summoned and it designed a really good cylinder head for the 2ZZGE. Toyota's engineers made the rotating assembly in the engine block really light, so the 2ZZGE would rev high and be rev happy and be sporty. But that wasn't enough. Toyota also installed its innovative vvtl-i variable camshaft timing technology into the cylinder head, and thus the 2ZZGE was born, and it was really good. It was really sporty. It was really light. It was so good that Lotus noticed it and Lotus wanted it. So a long-time engineer and driver, Roger Becker, went to Japan to court Toyota and ask for the engine. Lotus really wanted the 2ZZGE because the Rover K series it used up to that point, it was a good engine, but it no longer met emission standards in the US or in Europe. And Lotus wanted to sell the Elise both in Europe and in the US. It wanted to go global, and it needed a new engine, and it didn't go to Honda or BMW or Mazda or whoever. It went straight for the 2ZZGE because Lotus is all about building light cars. They shave off every ounce of unnecessary weight for their cars because Lotus believes that the best path towards ultimate handling and ultimate performance is to make your car as light as possible. And the 2ZZGE was super light, and it was rev happy, and it was responsive, and it was fun, so it was right there. It fit perfectly with the Lotus's philosophy. And initially Toyota said to Roger Becker, nah, we're not giving you this is too good, shoo. But then Roger Becker said, yo, we go way back. We used to work together, we may be different. You know, you're a thing and we're a this thing, and you know, give us the engine please. And they did. And so the brand new Series 2 Lotus Elise started coming to dealerships with a 2ZZGE sitting in its engine bay. And the Lotus Elise is a really light car. The base model weighs around 860 kilos, and the 2ZZGE makes 190 horsepower. And as you can see, that's a deadly power to weight ratio, and the Elise is capable of embarrassing many cars on the track. But Lotus is crazy, and that wasn't enough for them, so they supercharged the 2ZZGE, and then they put it in their Exige car, and then they added an intercooler, and the Exige 280S, or was it the S200? Doesn't matter, made 260 horsepower with a 2ZZGE supercharged engine in its engine bay, and that car weighs around 930 kilos, and as you can see, that's beyond a deadly power to weight ratio. And the Exige S260 goes to 60 miles per hour in around 4 seconds. So that's enough of Lotus extravagance. Let's talk more simple, more humble things. Let's see which Toyotas actually had the Toyota engine in them. Now, the 2ZZGE came in quite a few Toyotas. The most notable ones are, of course, the Celica, the Sporty Corollas, the Matrix, and among other things, the 2ZZGE came in this. This is a Will VS, or maybe it stands for Versus or something. This is a Japan only thing. This was the predecessor of this car, and as you can see, these are super weird, and they're called Will, but they're actually Toyotas with a bunch of Toyota parts, and it was an attempt by a bunch of different Japanese brands and companies to create products that would appeal to a younger generation. It's a long story, but basically for Toyota, it was a test bed for what would later become Scion in the States. Pretty interesting, right? So what does 2ZZGE stand for? Well, we know by now Toyota has this really convenient naming system, so 2ZZGE is the second version of the ZZ block, the first version being the 1ZZFE, and G is, as we know, performance wide-angled cylinder head, most often designed by Yamaha, and E is electronic fuel injection. When looking at the specs of the 2ZZ, it's really beneficial to look at it side by side with the engine that the 2ZZ evolved from, and that's of course the 1Z engine. This is going to help us realize what is it that makes the 2Z more sporty and what helps it make more power. So let's start with the basics, bore and stroke. As we can see, both the 2Z and the 1Z are under square engine designs, and this is kind of peculiar because the 2Z revs really high and is really rev happy, and usually under square engines aren't that rev happy and don't rev that high. But The 2Z isn't so much of an undersquare design, it's actually just 3 millimeters away from being a square design, which compared to the 1Z is pretty different because the 1Z has a much bigger stroke and that helps it make more torque early on, and it makes it more of a civilian engine that's easier and nicer to drive, you know, from A to B around town and so on and so forth. Another thing that helps the 2Z rev really high is the fact that it has some really light internals. It has a fully counterweight forged steel crankshaft, some pretty light forged steel con rods, and some pretty light pistons. So all this rotating assembly of the 2Z is pretty light, and this is why it's rev happy and reaches high RPM pretty easily. Being more performance oriented than the 1Z engine, the 2Z engine has significantly higher compression than the 1Z, and that of course helps with power. Another thing that helps with power is the fact that the 2Z breathes better than the 1Z. As a matter of fact, the 2Z engine has some of the largest intake valves in a 1.8 liter engine of the era when the 2Z was produced. At 34 millimeters, this is a very healthy intake valve size, and the exhaust valves aren't bad either. When it comes to the 1Z, of course, both the intake and the exhaust valves are smaller. Another thing that's different between the two engines is the variable valve technology employed. Now, the variable valve timing system on the 2Z has two different camshaft profiles, and it affects both the cam duration and the cam lift on both the intake and the exhaust camshaft. The variable valve stuff on the 1Z is much more modest, and it doesn't do anything to the cam lift. Speaking of the variable valve stuff, the system on the 2Z actually shows just how much of your typical peaky engine the 2Z is, and the more aggressive cam profile actually comes alive only at around 6 to 6,700 RPM, which is really high, and it shows you just how much you need to rev the 2Z to actually get it going, and depending on your tastes, that can be really fun to do. Both of the engines are a dual overhead cam design, with both of the cams in both of the engines being driven by a chain. Now, this is a tiny bit of a downer when it comes to a performance engine like the 2ZZGE, because we all know that chains tend to stretch as the miles add up. And as the chain stretches, your valve timing isn't quite what it used to be, and so your performance isn't quite what it used to be. Of course, you can replace a chain, but replacing a chain is typically harder, more time consuming, and more expensive than replacing a belt. Chains are also kind of more noisy than belts. As you can see, the 1Z and the 2Z are very different engines. Even though they have the same displacement, many of the parts between them aren't even interchangeable. You definitely can't take a 2Z head and slap it on a 1Z engine, no way, no how. And the differences, they really do add up. Same displacement, but as you can see, the 2Z makes a lot more power than the 1Z. And then when you take into account that it's a 1.8 liter that makes around 170 to 190 horsepower depending on the market, vehicle and tune, you realize that the 2Z actually makes more than 100 horsepower per liter of engine displacement. And that's really something. And then when you add to that the fact that the dry weight of a 2Z is only 115 kilograms, you realize that this is a really good engine. No wonder Lotus went for it. It's light, it's fun, it's responsive, it's powerful. What more could you ask from a tiny 4-cylinder? So I'm gonna start the tuning section with a bit of a bad news. Now, the 2ZZ is a more modern, a more efficient engine than, for example, the 4AGE or the 3SGE from Toyota. That being said, it's also more fragile, and making big power with the 2ZZ is going to require more money, time and effort than making big power with a 4AGE or a 3SGE, for example, and you're going to see why in just a few minutes. So let's start the virtual tuning process of a 2ZZ engine, and let's start with stage 1. Guess what? There's no stage 1. The 2ZZ is kinda already tuned from the factory. Toyota engineers worked really hard on making this a fun, sporty engine, and your typical bolt-on mods are often going to result in a power loss instead of a power gain on a 2ZZ. I mean, just look at the Lotus. They took a 2ZZ and they put it in what's basically a track car that's street illegal, and Lotus didn't do much to the 2ZZ. The biggest thing they did was mess with the fuel maps in the ECU. They didn't touch the cams, the cam gears, the intake. They left it. It's good as it is. It's already a performance engine. So stage one, pretty much nothing. That being said, a stock, good health 2ZZ is a great swap into older, lighter Toyotas. And there's plenty of older, lighter Toyotas than the ones that the 2ZZ came in from the factory. It was already the 2000s and cars were getting kinda heavy. The old light stuff with a 2ZZ in it, super fun. But let's say you want more power from the 2ZZ. How do you get more power from the 2ZZ? Well, we follow in the footsteps of Lotus. We supercharge that bugger and it makes good power just with a bolted on supercharger. You don't touch anything, you don't have to take the engine apart, you don't have to replace, pistons, rods, crankshafts, whatever, if it's all in good spec and if it isn't a high mileage engine. You can just bolt on a supercharger on it and it's gonna make good power. And the 2ZZ loves to be supercharged. Why? Well, it's a fun, responsive engine right out of the box. And unlike the 4AGE, for example, it actually has better torque low down because it has that nice, healthy stroke. And that means that with a supercharger, it becomes a instant response torque engine. It gets even more torque low down. It's super fun. It's basically, it behaves like an electric car. You touch it and it goes. A 2ZZGE that's supercharged is really fun in almost any car. And if you want even more power from a supercharged 2ZZGE, get an intercooler. Cool your charged air and it's going to make even more power. And it's going to be even more fun. It's a really good thing to do on a 2ZZGE, and bolt-on supercharger kits were made by Gredi. There's one called Katana. There was even a TRD one, which is very rare, and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of kits and they're still available new and used, and mind you, they won't be really cheap. You can even get the Eaton one that Lotus used. I mean, there's a bunch of them. Again, they won't be cheap, but you bolt them on and you have fun. What about that other forced induction option, turbo power? Well, you can build a turbo, but it is gonna be more, effort intensive and money intensive, of course, than building a turbo for a GE, for example. Why? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. The 2ZZ was never constructed with big boost in mind. It was made to rev high. It was made to be fun. It wasn't made to handle big boost. And there's another really important difference between the 1ZZ and the 2ZZ that we never mentioned, and it's cylinder liners. And this is a bit of a tricky area when it comes to the 2ZZ, so bear with me. The 1Z has conventional cast iron cylinder liners, used a million times in a million engines, nothing new. The 2Z has something revolutionary, and it was one of the first mass production engines to employ MMC. What is MMC? Well, it's a really fancy name, and it stands for Metal Matrix Composite. No, it has nothing to do with the matrix. It basically means that it's metal reinforced with different fibers and particles of different materials. This is what it actually is. I don't even know how to pronounce this stuff. Now, this was used to help the 2ZZ be as light and as compact as possible, and it worked. It's a really light engine. And in theory, this was supposed to be, you know, resistant to wear enough within specifications. It works. But actually, the MMC liner isn't all that resistant to wear, and it isn't all that durable. It works. It's okay. Daily driven cars, normally driven cars, you know, the 2ZZ can do high miles, although never as high as a 4AGE or a 3SGE with a cast iron blocks. Those things can do 500,000 miles. The 2ZZ can dream of that. Now, the biggest problem, one of the biggest causes of death to the MMC liner in the 2ZZ is people stepping on the gas without the engine being warmed up. This kills the engine. Now, here's the deal. A 2ZZ with a lot of miles, you can't do what you would do to a regular engine. To a regular engine, you would, you know, re-own the sleeves and be done with it, or rebore and re-own the sleeves, put some different pistons in, be done with it. No. On the 2ZZ, no. Because the MMC cylinder liner cannot be owned. Option doesn't exist. It's in the factory, it's a really specialized process to make this thing, and the MMC liner is actually electrochemically plated onto the cylinders, and there's no machine shop that can do that. So, if you want to replace these, if you want to renew your 2ZZ, you basically have two options. Get a brand new assembled long block from Toyota, or install different sleeves into your 2ZZ block. And already, at the first step, we have complications. You have to get either a new engine or install different blocks, which compared to the 4AGE or the 3SGE, it was a lot simpler. Bore the block, different pistons, off you go. Forged, cast, whatever you want, off you go. As you can see, more modern is also going to mean more expensive in this case, but it is more modern and it is more efficient, and if you build the 2ZZ for big power and if your wallet can take it, it's going to be a real performer. Another thing you can do with the 2ZZ is significantly increase the bore. Why? Because of those pesky MMC liners again. But you can increase the stroke. How? 1ZZ crankshaft, of course. It has more stroke, but it is going to require modification and custom rods and custom pistons and so on and so forth. So you're probably getting what I'm trying to say. If you want big power from the 2ZZ, it's going to require custom internals. Step 1. If you want big turbo power, there's no other way. Turboing a stock 2ZZ doesn't make sense at all. It was designed to rev high, not to handle boost. What about high power naturally aspirated builds? The 2ZZ loves that, but also that's going to be expensive as well, because the stock stuff, to get more NA power than that, is going to require some really serious parts, and it's going to be probably just as expensive as doing a high power turbo build. Maybe not just as expensive, but really close. So for some competitions that require NA 1.8 liter power, 2ZZ, it's awesome. The design is awesome. Yamaha did an amazing job on the cylinder head. Just look at the intake port angle onto the intake valve. Look at the beautiful length and straightness of this. You wonder why it's so responsive and why it breathes so well? Here's one of your answers. It's a good cylinder head. It's a good engine design. But, as I said, big power, big money. So I'm kind of making the 2ZZ sound bad, but some other reliability issues with the 2ZZ. It really isn't an unreliable engine. The problem is that I'm kind of comparing it with the older Toyota stuff, the 3SG and the 4AGE, and that was bulletproof. And the 2ZZ looks kind of bad in comparison, but in general terms, it isn't an unreliable engine compared to all the other engines from its time. It's pretty much the average. So, some other troubling things with the 2ZZ. It's famous for disintegrated oil pump gears. Yes, it can happen, but it doesn't happen just like that on its own. Normal street driving, it's likely never gonna happen. Most of the oil pump gears on a 2ZZ were disintegrated by a stupid downshift into the wrong gear. It can happen to anybody. For example, you're driving in third gear at 7,000 RPM, and then you downshift into second. You over rev the engine past the red line, and the fuel pump goes, and your engine goes. So, if you're going to drive it normally on the street, normal conditions, you do not have to worry about the oil pump gear disintegration unless you're going to shift crazily. But if you plan to do track days or drive spirited often on private roads, or race or compete, then getting a billet oil pump gear is a good idea and extra insurance for your engine. Definitely, because over revs can kill the stock oil pump gears. Another thing that early 2ZZGEs had a problem with was the bolt that held down the rocker arms of the vvtl-i system. These things weren't really well designed at the beginning, but Toyota fixed this really soon, issued a recall and made a new bolt design and put the bolts in, and it fixed the problem. Most of the engines that are out there today have had this fixed as part of that recall, so you're going to be hard pressed to find a 2ZZ with one of those old rocker arm bolts in there. And even when the bolts failed, they didn't cause any engine damage. It's simply the VVT thing that wouldn't activate, so it wasn't anything serious. And there you have it. As I promised, it's time for some cringe-worthy rap from a white person. In my name I got them 2 letters Z, and in the high rev range I'm always busy. I'm sitting in a Lotus engine bay. Yeah, I like to be supercharged, that's what they say. Big power from a small displacement. Your boy, my dyno sheet, is the ultimate statement. I don't know why I'm doing the rap thing. I'm actually just having fun. What do you think about it? Is it stupid? Should I get it out of these videos? Let me know. So yeah, that was pretty much it on the 2ZZ, the new generation of high-revving Toyota 4-cylinders. It is a good engine. It's not as bulletproof, but it is still good. It is very iconic. It is a very good design, and it powered some really cool cars, and it went into a Lotus, so I mean, it deserves the attention, definitely. What do you like about the 2ZZ? You know the drill. Comments, all yours. I'll be there. I'll answer. We'll talk. What do you think about which engine we should be doing next? Comment section. Any other suggestions? Also in the comments section. I read all my comments. I answer the vast majority that demand answering. So yeah, I love you guys, and if you did like this video, if you had fun watching it, there's a button for that. Also consider sharing with your engine-loving, car enthusiastic friends. So until next time, I'll be seeing ya on the D4A channel.